Before the hum of air conditioning units became the soundtrack of American summers, our ancestors had already mastered the art of staying cool. They didn't have thermostats, refrigerants, or electric bills that skyrocketed in July. What they had was something far more valuable: centuries of observation, ingenuity, and an intimate understanding of how buildings could work with nature instead of against it. If you've ever stepped into an old farmhouse on a sweltering August afternoon and felt that surprising coolness wash over you, you've experienced this forgotten wisdom firsthand. These weren't accidents of construction. Every window placement, every roof angle, every material choice was a calculated decision in an elegant system of passive cooling that kept families comfortable through countless summers. Let's step back in time and discover how American farmers and rural communities created homes that breathed with the seasons. The story of farmhouse cooling begins beneath your feet, quite literally. When settlers and farmers chose building sites, they weren't just looking for level ground or proximity to water sources. They were reading the land like a book, searching for natural advantages that would make their homes more livable. Experienced builders knew to position houses on slight elevations where possible. This wasn't about avoiding floods alone, though that certainly mattered. Elevated positions caught breezes that barely stirred at ground level. Even a rise of just 10 or 15 feet could mean the difference between stagnant air and a cooling cross breeze flowing through your home. But the real secret started with the foundation itself. Traditional farmhouses typically featured full basements or deep crawl spaces, often dug 6 to 8 feet below ground level. This wasn't wasted effort. Soil temperature at that depth remains remarkably stable year-round, hovering around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of what's happening at the surface. This thermal mass became a natural cooling reservoir. The basement served multiple purposes in the cooling system. It provided a cool refuge during the hottest part of the day, certainly, but more importantly, it acted as a thermal buffer for the entire house. Heat rising from the main floor would be drawn downward toward the cooler basement air through strategically placed floor vents, or grates. Meanwhile, the cool basement air would naturally rise to replace it, creating a gentle circulation that moderated indoor temperatures. Many farmhouses featured external basement entrances or bulkhead doors. During summer evenings, families would open these doors along with basement windows to flush out any accumulated warm air and draw in the cool night air. This cooled not just the basement, but also the foundation walls and floor joists, which would then absorb heat from the living spaces above during the following day. The thick walls of traditional farmhouses weren't thick by accident, or because builders didn't know any better. They understood thermal mass in a way that modern construction often forgets. In the Northeast and Midwest, stone and brick farmhouses dominated the landscape. These walls, often 18 to 24 inches thick, absorbed heat slowly during the day. By the time the wall's interior surface began to warm, the sun was setting and the cycle reversed. At night, these walls would radiate their accumulated heat outward, just as the interior needed to stay warm. During summer, this delay effect meant the interior stayed cooler during peak heat hours. In the South, different challenges called for different solutions. Many southern farmhouses featured double-wall construction with an air gap between exterior and interior walls. This created a thermal break that prevented heat from conducting directly into living spaces. Some builders took this further, creating ventilated wall cavities that allowed hot air to rise and escape through soffit vents, essentially turning the walls themselves into cooling chimneys. The materials mattered too. Limestone, sandstone, and locally quarried stone had different thermal properties, and experienced builders knew which performed best in their region. Adobe and rammed earth construction in the Southwest utilized thermal mass principles taken to their logical extreme, with walls sometimes exceeding 3 feet in thickness. Wood-framed farmhouses, more common in forested regions, and later in the 19th century, incorporated their own clever strategies. Builders would use dense hardwood framing and sheath the exterior with thick, tight-fitting boards. Many added a layer of sawdust, straw, or newspaper insulation in the wall cavities. While not as thermally massive as stone, this created enough insulation to slow heat transfer significantly. The exterior finish played a crucial role. White or light-colored paint wasn't just aesthetic, It reflected solar radiation rather than absorbing it. Some farmers would apply whitewash annually, adding fresh layers of lime-based paint that both protected the wood and maximized solar reflectance. In hot climates, you'd see lighter colors almost universally, while colder regions might opt for darker tones to capture winter sun. If there's one feature that defines the traditional American farmhouse, it's the porch. But porches weren't added for curb appeal or because they looked nice in pattern books. They were sophisticated climate control devices. The classic wraparound porch, or at minimum a deep front porch, served as a thermal buffer zone. The roof overhang shaded the walls and windows behind it, preventing direct solar gain during the hottest hours when the sun was highest. This shade could reduce wall surface temperatures by 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, but the porch did more than provide shade. It created a transitional space where hot outdoor air could mix and moderate before entering the house. When you sat on a porch on a hot afternoon, you weren't just being lazy, you were occupying the coolest outdoor space available. Air flowing past the porch would be slightly cooled by the shade, and if there was any breeze, the porch captured and directed it. The floor-to-ceiling ratio of porches was carefully considered. A porch that's too shallow doesn't provide adequate shading when the sun is high. Traditional porches typically extended 8 to 12 feet from the house wall, with roof heights 9 to 10 feet above the porch floor. This geometry ensured that even the high summer sun couldn't strike the windows directly. In the south, you'd find two-story porches or galleries that shaded both floors of the house. Some of the grandest examples featured porches on all four sides, creating a complete thermal envelope around the core living spaces. These weren't showing off, they were maximizing cooling efficiency. Porch ceilings often featured special treatment too. Many were painted haint blue, a light blue-green color. While folklore attributed this to keeping away spirits, the practical effect was that the light color reflected heat, and the specific pigments used in traditional recipes actually contained compounds that deterred insects. Some porch ceilings were left as exposed beadboard with gaps between boards, allowing hot air that accumulated at ceiling height to vent through into the attic space above. Walk around an old farmhouse and count the windows. You'll be surprised how many there are and how carefully they're positioned. This wasn't wasteful or evidence that glass was cheap. It was the implementation of a sophisticated ventilation strategy. The principle is simple but effective: cross-ventilation. Windows were placed on opposite walls, often directly across from each other, so that prevailing breezes could flow straight through the house. In many regions, builders knew the dominant summer wind direction and oriented their houses to capture it. But effective ventilation requires more than just holes in walls. It requires understanding convection. Hot air rises, cool air sinks. Farmhouse designers use this relentlessly. Most traditional farmhouses featured windows at different heights. Lower windows brought in cooler air near ground level, while upper windows, particularly in hallways and stairwells, allowed hot air to escape. This created a natural convection current that pulled fresh air through the entire house. The transom window, that small window above interior and exterior doors, was a critical component. During hot weather, you could leave doors closed for privacy while leaving transoms open. Hot air could still escape through the upper transom, while cooler replacement air entered through lower windows. Window size mattered too. Larger windows allowed more air movement, but they also meant more potential for solar gain. The solution was generous windows on north walls and smaller, carefully shaded windows on south and west walls, where afternoon sun was most intense. Window operation was an art form in itself. Farm families developed routines for opening and closing windows that maximized cooling. At night and in early morning, all windows would be thrown open to flush out accumulated heat and draw in cool night air. As the day warmed, strategic windows would be closed, particularly those receiving direct sunlight, trapping the cooler air inside. Then, as evening approached and outdoor temperatures dropped below indoor temperatures, the cycle would begin again. Shutters weren't decorative. Exterior shutters could be closed during the hottest part of the day to block solar heat, while still allowing some air circulation through the louvered slats. Some farmhouses featured interior shutters as well, providing an additional insulating layer. If you've ever been in a farmhouse attic on a summer afternoon, you know it's brutally hot. That's exactly the point. The attic wasn't living space, it was a heat collection and disposal system. The steep roofs typical of farmhouses weren't just about shedding rain and snow. They created large attic volumes that could hold enormous amounts of hot air. As the sun beat down on the roof, heat would transfer through the shingles and roof boards into the attic space. But if that heat stayed there, it would eventually conduct down into the living spaces below. The solution was ventilation. Gable vents at both ends of the attic created cross-ventilation in the attic space itself. Cupolas and roof vents, often placed at the peak of the roof, provided additional escape routes for the hottest air. Some farmhouses featured continuous ridge vents, though these were more common in barns and were only gradually adopted for houses. The principle was the same as whole-house ventilation, but on a different level. Draw in cooler air from the shaded eaves, allow it to heat up as it rises, and expel it through high vents. This constant air movement prevented the attic from becoming a heat reservoir that would slowly cook the rooms below. Attic floors, the ceilings of the living spaces, featured their own insulation strategies. In some regions, builders would spread a thick layer of sawdust, straw, or even seaweed between the joists. This created an insulating barrier that slowed heat transfer from the hot attic to the rooms below. Some farmhouses had attic floors covered in old newspapers, layered 6 inches thick or more, providing both insulation and a use for otherwise waste paper. The color and material of the roof itself mattered enormously. Light-colored metal roofs, increasingly common from the mid-19th century onward, reflected solar radiation rather than absorbing it. A metal roof would also heat up and cool down quickly, responding to changing conditions rather than holding heat. Traditional wooden shingles provided better insulation than metal, but absorbed more heat. Some farmers would paint their shingles white or light gray to balance these properties. If you've toured historic farmhouses, you've probably noticed the wide central hallways that run from front to back. These weren't wasted space in houses, where every square foot was precious. They were intentional cooling channels. The dog-trot house design, particularly common in the South, took this principle to its extreme. These houses literally had an open-air breezeway running through the center, with rooms on either side. You could stand in the middle of the house and feel the wind blowing through. The breezeway provided shade, encouraged air movement, and served as an outdoor living space protected from sun and rain. Even in houses with enclosed hallways, the principle remained. The central hall connected the front and rear entrances, and often the stairway to upper floors. With doors at both ends open, the hallway became a wind tunnel, channeling breezes through the house. The high ceilings typical of these hallways, often 10 to 12 feet, provided volume for hot air to collect and escape. Stairways played a special role in this system. As hot air rose up the stairs, it drew cooler air from lower levels behind it. At the top of the stairs, a window or transom could release this hot air into the attic or outdoors. Some farmhouses featured spiral or turning staircases that were less efficient for moving furniture, but created a chimney-like effect that was excellent for moving hot air. The doors themselves were designed with ventilation in mind. Many interior doors featured panels that could be removed seasonally, essentially converting the door into a screen that blocked sight but allowed airflow. 4-panel and 6-panel doors were common, and the panels weren't just decoration, they were potential ventilation openings. The kitchen was the hottest room in any farmhouse, and not because of the weather. The wood-burning cook stove, essential for preparing meals, generated tremendous heat. Running a cook stove on a July afternoon would raise indoor temperatures to unbearable levels. The solution was the summer kitchen, a separate building or addition where cooking could be done without heating the main house. These structures ranged from simple sheds to substantial buildings with their own fireplaces and workspaces. By isolating the heat source, families could prepare meals without turning their homes into ovens. Summer kitchens were typically placed a short distance from the main house, connected by a covered walkway or breezeway. This separation provided fire safety benefits as well as thermal ones. The main house kitchen would remain minimally equipped for cold beverages and light food preparation, while all major cooking moved to the summer kitchen from late spring through early fall. Not every farm family could afford a separate summer kitchen, but they found alternatives. Many would do their cooking very early in the morning or late in the evening when outdoor temperatures were coolest. Meals during hot weather tended toward cold dishes, preserved foods, and items that required minimal cooking. The seasonal diet of rural America was shaped as much by cooling concerns as by what was available. Some farmhouses featured outdoor baking ovens, essentially large stone or brick structures where bread and other items could be baked without heating the house. These beehive-shaped ovens fired with wood could retain heat for hours, allowing families to do a week's baking in a single session. The land around a farmhouse wasn't just cleared space and tidy lawns. It was part of the cooling system. Deciduous trees were planted strategically, particularly on the south and west sides of houses. These trees provided shade during summer when their leaves were full, but allowed winter sun to reach the house after leaves fell. A mature oak or maple could reduce cooling needs for a house by 20 to 30%, simply through shading walls, windows, and roof. The species mattered. Sugar maples, oaks, and other hardwoods with dense canopies provided maximum shade. These trees were planted close enough to shade the house, but far enough that roots wouldn't threaten foundations and branches wouldn't damage roofs in storms. Experienced farmers could calculate these distances by eye. Evergreen trees, which retained their needles year-round, were planted as windbreaks on the north and west sides of properties. These blocked cold winter winds, but were positioned to avoid shading the house in summer when the sun's angle was high. Vines were another tool. Grapevines, wisteria, and other climbing plants would be trained over arbors and trellises on the south and west sides of porches and walls. The dense foliage provided shade, while the air gaps between the vines and the wall allowed ventilation. In fall, the vines would die back or lose leaves, once again admitting winter sun. Kitchen gardens were often planted on the east side of the house, where they received morning sun but were shaded from the most intense afternoon heat. The transpiration from the plants, the release of water vapor from their leaves, created a small cooling effect in the immediate vicinity. Even the ground surface was managed for cooling. Grass lawns, while less common than today, provided a cooler surface than bare dirt. The grass reflected more sunlight and stayed cooler through evapotranspiration. Some farmers would plant low ground cover close to the house foundation to keep the ground shaded and cool. While farmhouses didn't have electric swamp coolers, farmers understood evaporative cooling and used it whenever possible. Cisterns, those large tanks for collecting rainwater, were often positioned on the north side of houses where they remained shaded. The thermal mass of hundreds or thousands of gallons of water helped moderate nearby temperatures. Some farmhouses had cisterns in their basements or under porches, providing both water storage and a cooling mass. Wells, essential to any farmhouse, were often positioned near the house with a small enclosed well house or spring house. These structures, built over or near the water source, remained remarkably cool. Families would store perishable foods in the well house, and on the hottest days, members of the household might retreat there for relief. Spring houses, where a natural spring flowed through a small building, provided both refrigeration and a cool space. The running water, emerging from underground at a constant 50 to 55 degrees, would cool the air in the spring house. Crocks of butter, milk, and other perishables would sit in the flowing water, kept fresh without ice. Some innovative farmers created splash pools or shallow ponds near their houses. The evaporating water cooled the surrounding air. If positioned correctly with respect to prevailing winds, this cooler air would flow toward and into the house. Wet sheets and towels were hung near open windows or on porches. As water evaporated from the fabric, it absorbed heat from the air, creating a measurable cooling effect. This was more common in drier climates where evaporation happened quickly, but desperate people in humid regions tried it too. The houses provided the framework, but people made the system work through their daily routines and seasonal adaptations. Farm families rose early, often before dawn, not just to avoid heat, but to take advantage of cool morning hours for heavy work. The period between first light and mid-morning was precious for physical labor, while hot afternoons were reserved for lighter tasks or rest. The concept of a midday siesta, common in hot climates worldwide, was practiced informally on American farms. After the noon meal, the hottest part of the day, family members might rest in the coolest parts of the house, often the basement or a shaded porch. Clothing choices reflected heat management. Light-colored, loose-fitting garments in natural fibers allowed air circulation and reflected heat. Cotton and linen were preferred over wool. Men often wore long sleeves despite the heat, as covered skin stayed cooler than exposed skin in direct sunlight. And the fabric absorbed sweat for evaporative cooling. Sleeping arrangements changed with the seasons. Summer might see families sleeping on porches, in breezeways, or even outdoors on especially hot nights. Bedrooms on upper floors, unbearable in heat, would be abandoned in favor of cooler ground floor spaces. Meal patterns adapted too. Heavy, hot meals were served at midday when people needed energy for afternoon work, but these were planned to be finished cooking before the worst heat. Evening meals were often lighter, featuring cold dishes, fresh vegetables, and items requiring minimal cooking. Water consumption increased, obviously, but the timing mattered. Drinking cool water from the well or spring house before, during, and after work helped regulate body temperature. Some farmers would soak their hats in cold water before going into the fields. Modern builders might be surprised at how much thought went into material selection for these old houses, and how much of that thought centered on thermal performance. Plaster walls, common in older farmhouses, provided better thermal mass than modern drywall. A three-coat plaster application over wooden lath created a wall surface about an inch thick with good heat capacity. These walls would absorb heat slowly and release it slowly, moderating temperature swings. Floor materials mattered too. Wood floors over vented crawl spaces or basements stayed cooler than floors on slab foundations. The airspace below provided insulation and allowed cooler ground-level air to moderate floor temperatures. Hardwood floors, denser than soft woods, provided better thermal mass. Paint wasn't just decoration, it was part of the thermal management system. Whitewash and lime-based paints on exterior walls reflected solar radiation. Interior walls might be painted in lighter colors to reflect light and reduce the need for heat-generating lamps, but darker colors on floors absorbed any heat that did enter, keeping it low where it could sink into basement or crawl space. Window glass quality varied, but thick, wavy glass like you see in old houses actually provided better insulation than perfectly clear, thin glass. The imperfections scattered light and heat, reducing direct solar gain. Even the nails used in construction had thermal implications. Hand-forged nails, used in the oldest houses, created tighter connections than cut nails because the hammering process compressed the wood fibers. Tighter construction meant less air leakage, though builders compensated with intentional ventilation openings. American farmhouses developed regional characteristics based on climate, available materials, and cultural traditions, but all shared the goal of passive cooling. New England farmhouses often featured connected farm buildings, the house connected to barn through a series of sheds and workspaces. This protected families from harsh winter weather, but it also created a thermal buffer. The barn and outbuildings absorbed solar heat that might otherwise strike the house. Mid-Atlantic farmhouses frequently used stone construction, taking advantage of abundant limestone and sandstone. Pennsylvania German farmhouses often featured thick stone walls, small windows on the south, and strategic placement of chimneys to exhaust heat. Southern farmhouses embraced maximum ventilation. High ceilings, often 12 to 14 feet, provided volume for heat to rise away from living height. Large windows, sometimes floor to ceiling, maximized airflow. Dog trot designs and expansive porches were common. Raised foundations kept living spaces above the hot ground and allowed air circulation beneath the house. Midwestern farmhouses balanced cold winters and hot summers. Thick walls, full basements, and multiple layers of thermal protection were common. These houses often featured widows' walks or cupolas that provided excellent summer ventilation while serving as lookouts over flat prairie. Western and southwestern farmhouses adapted to extreme heat and low humidity. Thick adobe walls, small windows to minimize solar gain, and deep porches were standard. Courtyard designs, borrowed from Spanish colonial traditions, created shaded outdoor spaces and protected the house interior from direct sun. The widespread adoption of air conditioning in the mid-20th century made these passive cooling techniques seem unnecessary. Houses built after World War II often ignored or actively rejected traditional wisdom, assuming mechanical cooling could handle everything. The results weren't entirely successful. Modern houses often cost more to cool, depend entirely on functioning electrical systems, and lack the graceful adaptation to climate that older houses achieved. When the power goes out during a heat wave, a modern house becomes uncomfortable quickly, while a traditionally designed house remains livable. Recently, architects and builders have rediscovered these principles. Passive house design, green building, and sustainable architecture incorporate many of the same strategies that farmhouse builders used 150 or 200 years ago. Cross-ventilation, thermal mass, strategic shading, and careful material selection are again being recognized as essential design elements. Historic preservation efforts have helped maintain examples of traditional farmhouse design, allowing us to study and learn from them. Living history farms and museums demonstrate not just the houses, but the complete systems of landscaping, outbuildings, and behavioral adaptations that made them work. Some modern homeowners are retrofitting their houses with traditional cooling features, adding porches, improving ventilation, and enhancing shading. Even in new construction, these time-tested principles are being combined with modern materials and building science to create homes that are comfortable, efficient, and resilient. What made traditional farmhouse cooling so effective wasn't any single feature, but the integration of multiple strategies into a comprehensive system. The basement moderated ground-level temperatures, thick walls absorbed and delayed heat, porches shaded walls and windows, strategic ventilation moved air through the house, attics collected and expelled hot air, and the surrounding landscape shaded and cooled the entire property. Each element reinforced the others. The system was redundant in the best sense, so that if one element wasn't working optimally, others compensated. And it was passive, requiring no energy input beyond opening and closing windows and doors. This wasn't primitive technology or making do with what was available. It was sophisticated climate control achieved through observation, experimentation, and accumulated wisdom passed from one generation to the next. Builders who couldn't explain the physics of convection or thermal mass nevertheless understood how to use these principles effectively. The farmhouse builders of 150 years ago couldn't have imagined air conditioning, but if they could see our modern houses, they might be puzzled by our approach. Why seal a house so tightly that it needs mechanical ventilation? Why place large windows on the west side, where afternoon sun will create massive solar gain? Why neglect shade trees and natural cooling breezes? Their houses worked with nature rather than trying to overpower it. They were resilient, continuing to provide comfort even when systems failed or resources were scarce. They were sustainable, requiring no external energy for basic cooling. And they were beautiful, their proportions and details arising from functional requirements rather than applied decoration. We can't simply copy these old houses. Our lives and expectations are different, but we can learn from their principles and adapt them to modern contexts. Strategic window placement still matters. Cross-ventilation still works. Thermal mass still moderates temperature swings. Porches still shade walls. Trees still cool houses. These principles don't depend on old-fashioned construction methods or primitive materials. Modern materials can actually improve on historical performance. High-performance windows can provide better insulation than old single-pane glass while still allowing ventilation. Spray foam insulation can seal houses more effectively than newspaper and sawdust, while still permitting natural ventilation where desired. Metal roofing technology has advanced enormously, providing reflective surfaces that old tin roofs couldn't match. But the lesson isn't just about building techniques. It's about understanding that comfort doesn't require constant energy input. It's about designing with nature rather than despite it. It's about valuing resilience and adaptability over total control. The old farmhouse sitting on that hill, shaded by century-old oaks, with its deep porch and tall windows, isn't just a relic. It's a teacher if we're willing to learn. Every board and stone represents a decision made by someone who understood their climate and knew how to create comfort within it. We have technologies they never dreamed of, but we've lost knowledge they took for granted. The most sustainable path forward might be combining their wisdom with our technology, creating houses that can work with or without mechanical systems, that adapt to their environments, and that provide comfort through intelligent design rather than brute force energy consumption. The secret of farmhouse cooling wasn't really secret at all. It was common knowledge, shared freely and improved with each generation. We just forgot it for a while. Now, as energy costs rise and climate challenges intensify, that knowledge is worth remembering. Those old farmhouses are still standing, still comfortable in summer, still teaching their lessons to anyone willing to pay attention. They represent not just history, but possibility. A reminder that humans have always been capable of creating comfortable spaces through observation, intelligence, and respect for natural systems. The next time you visit an old farmhouse on a hot summer day, pay attention to how it feels. Notice the breeze flowing through, the coolness of the thick walls, the shade of the porch. That comfort isn't accidental. It's the result of generations of accumulated knowledge built into every timber and stone. We owe it to ourselves and future generations to remember these lessons, to value this wisdom, and to build houses that work as intelligently with nature as those old farmhouses still do. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found this journey into traditional farmhouse cooling fascinating, please consider subscribing to our channel for more explorations of forgotten wisdom and historical ingenuity. Give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new, and share it with anyone interested in architecture, history, or sustainable living. This video is inspired by real historical facts and architectural practices. It is not intended to represent or offend any particular individuals, communities, or groups. Our goal is to educate and inspire appreciation for traditional building wisdom.